The sky over Kessler was the color of rust that day, and the wind smelled like hot metal and ash. Daniel Reyes did not choose to land there. His cargo shuttle chose for him, coughing black smoke from a cracked engine after a piece of drifting space debris tore through its hull. He fought the controls for 6 long minutes, sweat soaking through his shirt, before the ship finally hit the ground hard, skidded across a field of black volcanic rock, and stopped just short of a cliff that dropped into nothing. For a while he just sat there, gripping the shaking control stick, listening to his own heartbeat. Then he heard something outside. A deep, rolling sound, like far-off thunder, except it did not fade away. It grew closer. He should have stayed inside the wreck. He knew that. But the smoke was filling the cabin, and his instincts as a former combat medic told him to move before the fumes put him to sleep for good. He pulled himself out through the broken door and dropped onto the black rock, coughing, one arm pressed against a cut on his ribs. That was when he saw them. Dragons. Not the kind from old human stories, small and painted on shields, but real ones, towering shapes with wings that blotted out sunlight, scales that shimmered even under the dull red sky, and eyes that watched him with an intelligence that made his skin crawl. He had heard of them before, in passing reports back at the trading post. A powerful species, keepers of a stone and sky kingdom, rarely seen by outsiders. He never expected to crash right into the middle of their territory. He raised his hand slowly, the universal sign for I mean no harm, though he doubted it would matter to a creature the size of a building. The dragons did not attack. Instead, they watched him with a strange stillness, and one of them, a tall dragon draped in ornamented armor, let out a call that echoed across the rocky field. Within minutes, more shapes arrived from the sky, landing all around him in a wide circle. Daniel realized, with a growing sense of dread, that he had crashed not just into dragon territory, but into something important, some kind of gathering. He was marched, more escorted than forced, though the difference felt very small, toward a massive stone temple built into the side of a mountain. Its towers curled upward like claws reaching for the clouds. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of sulfur and old stone. Rows of alien beings from many worlds stood along the walls, warriors in heavy armor, diplomats in flowing robes, creatures Daniel had never even heard of. All of them turned to look at him, the small, bleeding human dragged in from a crash site. At the center of it all sat a dragon larger than any other, her scales a deep shade of blue that seemed to hold starlight within it. Her eyes were old, older than anything Daniel had ever looked into, and there was a weight in her gaze that made him want to look away. This, he would later learn, was Queen Savith, ruler of the Dragon Spire, a leader who had reigned for longer than most civilizations had existed. In front of her, on a bed of warm stone, lay 3 newly hatched dragons, still damp from their shells, their wings folded tight against small, trembling bodies. Daniel did not understand yet what was happening. He only knew that the entire hall had gone silent, waiting for something. The 3 hatchlings stirred. One by one, they lifted their heads and looked out over the crowd of warriors and dignitaries who had traveled from distant worlds hoping to be chosen for an honor Daniel could not yet name. Then, without warning, the hatchlings began to move. Not toward the armored warriors. Not toward the powerful delegates dressed in ceremonial gold. They crawled, clumsy and small, straight across the stone floor, past rows of stunned onlookers, until they reached the wounded, confused humans standing at the back of the hall. The smallest of the 3 hatchlings pressed its head against Daniel's leg and let out a soft, chirping sound. The other 2 followed, curling around his boots like they had known him their whole short lives. Gasps rippled through the hall. Somewhere near the front, a broad-shouldered dragon warrior in dark armor let out a low growl of disbelief. Queen Savith said nothing at first. She simply stared, her ancient eyes fixed on the human who had done nothing but survive a crash and stumble into the middle of the most sacred ritual her people knew. Daniel looked down at the 3 small dragons wrapped around his legs, then up at the enormous queen watching him from her throne of stone. He did not understand dragon customs. He did not understand why 3 baby dragons had chosen him instead of the warriors around him. But he understood, deep in his gut, that something had just changed, not only for him, but for the entire hall of watching eyes. The queen finally spoke, her voice low and resonant. shaking the very stones beneath his feet. "The choosing has been made," she said. "Whether this pleases us or not, the old law is clear. The hatchlings have spoken." Daniel swallowed hard, feeling the weight of 100 stares pressing down on him. Whatever had just happened, whatever it meant, he had a feeling his simple cargo route through this region of space had just become the least simple thing he had ever done. 3 days passed before Daniel understood what he had actually agreed to, and the truth was, he had not agreed to anything at all. He had simply survived a crash, and now he was living in a stone room carved into the side of a mountain, with 3 baby dragons sleeping in a pile at the foot of his bed like they had claimed him as their own personal furniture. An old dragon named Ovash visited him each morning. Ovash was smaller than the others, with faded gray scales and a slow, careful way of speaking, like every word had been chosen with great thought. Ovash served as an advisor to the queen, and it was Ovash who finally explained, in patient detail, what the hatchling's choice actually meant. "You have been named champion," Ovash said, settling into a low stone seat across from Daniel. "It is not a title we give lightly. The hatchlings, when they first open their eyes, are said to sense something in a being that even we adults cannot see. Loyalty, strength of spirit. The bond, once made, cannot be undone by us. Only time, or death, can break it." Daniel rubbed his face with both hands. "I'm a cargo pilot," he said. "Before that, I patched up soldiers in a war that had nothing to do with dragons. I don't know the first thing about being anyone's champion." "That may be true," Ovash said, "but the hatchlings did not choose your title. They chose you." That answer did not comfort Daniel much. Over the following days, he learned more about what the role demanded. A champion was expected to protect the hatchlings as they grew, to represent the queen in matters of honor and combat, and eventually to stand as one of the pillars holding up the entire Dragonspire community. It was, by any measure, an enormous responsibility, and Daniel had not asked for a single piece of it. He tried, more than once, to explain that he needed to return home, that he had a life waiting for him beyond the reach of this planet. Each time, the 3 hatchlings, whom he had begun calling by simple names, Rook, Fawn, and Tally, would press against him and let out mournful little cries, as if they understood every word and could not bear the thought of him leaving. It was hard to argue logic against a creature that looked at you like you were its entire world. Not everyone in the spire welcomed him. General Threk, the broad-shouldered warrior who had growled during the choosing, made his feelings very clear. He found Daniel on the training terrace one afternoon, arms crossed, scales darkened with old battle scars. "You do not belong here," Threk said bluntly. "The hatchlings are young. They do not understand strength. They see something small and soft, and their instincts mistake it for safety. You are neither strong enough to protect them, nor wise enough to guide them." Daniel did not back down, though his stomach twisted with nerves. "Maybe you're right," he said, "but I didn't ask for this. And as long as those 3 are attached to my leg every time I try to walk away, I'm not going anywhere." Threk's eyes narrowed, but something in his expression shifted, just slightly, like a flicker of grudging curiosity. He said nothing more and walked away. Word of the human champion spread quickly beyond the spire, and not everyone found it amusing. A delegation from a proud warrior species, tall creatures with plated silver skin and sharp opinions about honor, arrived within the week to question the queen directly. They argued loudly in the grand hall, insisting that allowing an untrained outsider to hold such a sacred position would weaken the spire's standing among the stars. Daniel was not present for most of these arguments, but he heard about them from Ovash, who visited him each evening with updates delivered in a calm, steady voice, as if trying to keep Daniel from panicking. "The queen defends the old law," Ovash told him one night, as Rook curled up against Daniel's side and let out a soft snore. "But defending a law and believing in its outcome are 2 different things. Even she has doubts." Daniel looked down at the 3 sleeping hatchlings, their small chests rising and falling in unison. He thought about his old life, the quiet cargo runs, the simple routines, the complete absence of ancient dragon politics. That life felt impossibly far away now. "What happens if I fail?" he asked quietly. Ovash considered the question for a long moment. "Then the bond breaks," the old dragon said. "And a broken bond, for hatchlings this young, is not something easily healed." Daniel said nothing else that night. He simply sat in the warm stone room, listening to the wind outside, and wondered how a man who had never wanted to be anyone's hero had somehow become the last hope of three creatures who could one day grow large enough to reshape the sky. The training grounds of the Dragon Spire sat on a wide stone shelf halfway up the mountain, exposed to the wind and the heat rising from the volcanic vents below. It was here that General Threk decided to teach Daniel exactly how unprepared he was for the title he now carried. The first lesson began before sunrise. Threk woke him by dropping a heavy training spear onto the stone floor beside his bed, the sound echoing through the small room loud enough to send Rook, Fun, and Tally scattering in surprise. "Warriors do not sleep past first light," Threk said flatly, already walking out the door. Daniel dragged himself up, sore and half awake, and followed. What came next was, by his own private judgment, one of the most exhausting mornings of his life. Threk ran him through drills meant for dragon soldiers 3 times his size, exercises that stretched his human body in ways it had never been stretched before. He was knocked down more times than he could count. His arms shook from holding a weapon far too heavy for him, and by midday, he collapsed onto the stone, gasping, certain that Threk was trying to make him quit rather than teach him anything useful. "You are slow," Threk said, standing over him without a trace of sympathy. "You are weak compared to us. You have no wings, no fire, no scales to protect you. Explain to me again why the hatchlings did not choose someone worthy." Daniel pushed himself up onto one elbow, chest heaving. "Maybe because strength isn't the only thing worth choosing," he muttered. Threk did not respond, but he did not walk away either. Despite the brutal training, small things began to shift. A few days later, a young dragon soldier was injured during a sparring accident, a deep gash along his foreleg that the Spire's healers were too occupied to reach quickly. Daniel, remembering years of field medicine from a war fought on a very different world, rushed over without thinking twice. He cleaned the wound, applied pressure, and used strips of cloth to bind it tightly enough to stop the bleeding until proper healers arrived. The soldier, pale and shaking, looked at him with something like surprise. "You did not have to help," the soldier said. "Didn't need a reason to," Daniel replied simply. Word of the small act spread quietly through the spire, the way such stories do. It did not silence the doubts about him, but it planted a seed of curiosity among some of the dragons who had only ever seen him as an oddity forced upon their sacred tradition. Then came the tremor. It happened without warning, a deep shudder that rolled beneath the mountain and sent loose stone crashing down near the nursery caves where younger hatchlings, including Rook, Fun, and Tally, had been resting. Alarms sounded, deep booming calls passed from dragon to dragon across the spire, and chaos broke out as adult dragons scrambled to secure the nursery. Daniel was closest. He did not think. He simply ran toward the shaking cave entrance as smaller dragons cried out in fear inside. He found Tally trapped beneath a fallen support beam, wings pinned, letting out frightened chirps that cut straight through him. Working fast, he wedged a length of broken stone under the beam, using it as a lever the way he had learned patching up collapsed shelters years ago, and pulled with everything he had until the beam lifted just enough for Tally to scramble free. By the time adult dragons arrived to help clear the rest of the debris, the immediate danger had passed, and Daniel sat on the cave floor, covered in dust, with all 3 hatchlings pressed tightly against him, trembling but safe. Queen Sabbath herself came to see the aftermath. She said nothing to Daniel directly, not yet, but her eyes lingered on the sight of the small human sitting calmly amid the wreckage. Hatchlings curled protectively around him rather than the other way around. Something in her expression, old and unreadable, shifted just slightly. That evening, as Daniel sat outside his stone quarters watching the twin moons rise over the jagged mountains, he found himself beginning to understand the hatchlings in a way words could not fully explain. Rook, curious and bold, always wandered first into any new space. Fun, quieter, stayed close and watched everything with careful eyes. Tally, the smallest, made soft chirping sounds whenever she wanted comfort, sounds Daniel had slowly learned to recognize as her own private language. He had spent his whole adult life following orders and routes charted by someone else. He never imagined he would end up here, on an alien mountain, learning to read the emotions of baby dragons through sound and posture rather than speech. General Threk found him there that night, standing at a distance for a long moment before finally speaking. "You lifted stone no soldier should have been able to move alone," he said. It was not quite praise, but it was not the cold dismissal from before either. "Adrenaline does strange things," Daniel replied. Threk studied him for a moment longer, then gave a small, almost invisible nod before turning and walking back into the dark. Daniel watched him go, then looked down at the 3 sleeping hatchlings curled against his legs, and for the first time since crashing onto this world, he allowed himself to think that maybe, just maybe, he was starting to belong here. Smoke was the first warning. Daniel smelled it before he heard the alarms, a sharp, burning scent carried on the night wind, completely different from the usual sulfur smell of the mountain. He was awake instantly, rolling out of bed as Rook, Fun, and Tally stirred beside him, sensing his sudden tension even before the deep warning calls began echoing across the spire. He grabbed the short blade Threk had given him during training, still unfamiliar in his hand, and ran toward the sound of shouting. Outside, the sky glowed orange near the outer nursery caves, the ones closest to the mountain's edge where younger hatchlings from other clutches were kept during the night. A raiding party, creatures from a hostile faction angered by the rising status of a human champion, had struck under cover of darkness, hoping to steal or harm a hatchling and shame the queen's rule in front of the watching stars. Daniel's stomach dropped when he realized where the attack was centered. He grabbed the hatchlings, pressing Rook, Fun, and Tally behind a fallen stone pillar near his quarters, speaking low and steady, the way he used to calm frightened soldiers on the battlefield. "Stay here. Stay low. I'll be back." He was not trained for this. Not really. A few days of brutal drills with Threk did not make him a warrior, and every instinct told him to wait for the actual soldiers to handle it. But the raiders were closing in on a section of caves that held hatchlings too young to defend themselves, and there was no time to wait. He moved through the smoke using what he did know, ducking behind cover, watching angles, thinking in terms of terrain rather than brute force. Years of working supply routes through dangerous territory had taught him how to read a battlefield even without wings or claws. He spotted 2 raiders forcing their way into a nursery entrance and did the only thing he could think of, grabbing a length of loose cable from a damaged supply crate and using it to trip one attacker mid-stride, sending him crashing into a stone wall hard enough to knock him out cold. The second raider turned toward him with a snarl, but Daniel was already moving, throwing a handful of loose gravel into its eyes before driving forward with the short blade, more desperate than skilled. It was enough. The raider stumbled back, disoriented, giving Daniel just enough time to slam a heavy wooden support beam down across its path, sealing off the nursery entrance long enough for actual dragon soldiers to arrive. Threk landed hard beside him moments later, eyes wide with something between shock and disbelief at the sight of a wounded human standing guard over a nursery entrance, having single-handedly delayed 2 armed attackers. "Move," Threk barked, and Daniel did not argue, falling back as the general and a handful of soldiers took over, clearing the remaining raiders from the outer caves within minutes. By the time the chaos settled, the raiding party had been driven off, though not without cost. Several younger dragons had been injured, and the outer wall of the nursery had partially collapsed. Daniel spent the next several hours doing what he knew best, treating wounds, applying pressure to cuts, calming panicked young dragons with a steady voice, while the spire's healers worked alongside him. It was well past midnight when he finally sat down, exhausted, back against a scorched stone wall. Rook, Fun, and Tally pressed tightly against him once again, refusing to leave his side even for a moment. His hands were shaking, more from adrenaline than fear, and a shallow cut along his shoulder stung with every movement. But the hatchlings were safe. That was the only thing that mattered. Threk approached quietly, his armor still dented from the fight. He looked down at Daniel for a long moment before speaking. "You did not fight like a dragon," he said. "No," Daniel agreed, too tired to argue. "I fought like a human." Threk studied him, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. "It worked," he said simply. It was not an apology. It was not warmth. But it was, Daniel realized, the closest thing to respect Threk had offered him since his arrival. Word of the raid spread through the spire quickly, and with it came a shift in how many of the dragons looked at him. He was no longer just the strange outsider chosen by 3 confused hatchlings. He had bled defending their home, had used quick thinking rather than raw strength to hold a line no one expected him to hold. Even some of the soldiers who had mocked him openly now offered quiet nods of acknowledgement as he passed. Not everyone was convinced. Word soon reached the wider Dragon Council that a human champion had fought off armed raiders using improvised tactics rather than proven combat skill, and rather than seeing it as strength, several council members saw only more reason to challenge his place among them. Daniel did not know that yet, sitting exhausted against the scorched stone wall with 3 hatchlings sleeping soundly against him. For now, he simply allowed himself a small, tired breath of relief, grateful that whatever storm was still coming, tonight at least, they were all still safe. The summons arrived on a gray morning, carried by a messenger dragon whose formal tone made it clear this was not a request. The Dragon Council, the highest governing body among the Spire's many territories, had called an emergency gathering, and both Queen Savith and her human champion were expected to attend. Daniel had never seen the council chamber before. It was carved deep into the mountain's core, a massive circular room lit by streams of glowing lava running behind thick glass walls, casting everything in a dim orange light. Dozens of dragon elders and representatives from allied worlds filled the stone seats rising around the chamber, their eyes locking onto him the moment he stepped inside. An elder with pale, cracked scales rose first, his voice carrying easily across the silent chamber. "The raid 3 nights past has proven what many of us feared," he said. "A champion untrained in our ways, unfamiliar with true combat, nearly cost us hatchlings under our protection. The choosing may be sacred, but it was never meant to place our future in such fragile, unproven hands." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Daniel stood still, jaw tight, saying nothing, though his heart pounded harder with every passing second. Queen Savitha's voice cut through the noise, calm but firm. The human did not fail that night. He held the line until aid arrived. Hatchlings under his protection survived unharmed. By chance, another elder argued. Not by skill befitting a true champion. The debate stretched on, voices rising and falling, until finally the pale-scaled elder proposed what Daniel had feared from the moment he stepped into the chamber. A formal challenge, ritual combat against a proven warrior chosen by the council to settle the matter once and for all. If Daniel won, his place would be secured beyond further question. If he lost, the ancient law required his removal from the spire entirely, taking with him the bond shared with Rook, Fawn, and Tally, a separation considered among the cruelest fates a hatchling could endure. Daniel felt the weight of the entire chamber pressing down on him as the challenge was formally announced. He wanted to argue, to explain that he had never claimed to be a warrior, that he had simply done what needed doing in the moment. But he understood, watching the sea of stern, unmoving faces around him, that no argument would change their minds. Only the fight itself would. That night, sleep refused to come. He sat outside his quarters beneath the twin moons, staring out over the dark mountains, doubt gnawing at him harder than it ever had before. He was no warrior. He had survived the raid through luck and desperation, not skill. Facing a chosen champion in formal combat felt like an entirely different, impossible task. It was Queen Savith herself who found him there, arriving quietly, without the usual ceremony that surrounded her. She settled onto the stone beside him, her enormous form somehow gentler in the moonlight than it had ever appeared in the grand hall. "You carry doubt," she said simply. Daniel let out a tired breath. "I'm not built for this," he admitted. "Not like your warriors. I don't have wings or fire or claws. I don't know how I'm supposed to win a fight everyone already expects me to lose." The queen was quiet for a long moment, her ancient eyes fixed on the horizon. "Do you know how long I have ruled this spire?" she asked eventually. "A long time," Daniel guessed. "Long enough to bury 3 champions chosen before you," she said. "Long enough to watch the old traditions harden into something rigid, something that forgets why they were created in the first place. The hatchlings do not choose strength alone. They choose something deeper, something even I have forgotten how to name." Daniel looked over at her, surprised by the rare vulnerability in her voice. "I have ruled a very long time," she continued, and in all those years, I have rarely spoken so openly to anyone, dragon or otherwise. Perhaps that is its own kind of loneliness. She turned her gaze toward him. The hatchlings saw something in you that this entire council refuses to see. I find myself, against my own better judgment, beginning to trust their instincts more than the old traditions I have upheld for centuries. For the first time since arriving on Kesser, Daniel felt something other than fear or confusion settle over him. It was not confidence exactly, but it was something close to it, a quiet steadiness born from knowing he was not entirely alone in this. The challenge is set for tomorrow at first light, Queen Sabbath said, rising slowly to her feet. Whatever happens, know that the hatchlings' bond with you was never a mistake, whether the council believes that or not. She left him there beneath the moons, and Daniel sat a while longer, watching Rook, Fun, and Tally sleeping soundly nearby, unaware of just how much rested on the outcome of the coming day. He thought of everything he had learned since crashing onto this world, the training, the raid, the quiet trust built between himself and 3 small dragons who refused to let him walk away. Tomorrow, he would need every bit of it. Dawn broke over Kesser with a strange stillness, the wind quiet, the mountains silent except for the distant rumble of the volcanic vents below. The entire spire had gathered on the wide stone terrace built specifically for ritual combat, a circle of flattened rocks surrounded by rising seats carved into the mountainside, filled now with hundreds of watching eyes. Daniel stood at one edge of the circle. The short blade Threk had trained him with gripped tightly in his hand, his heart pounding so loudly he was certain the dragons closest to him could hear it. Across the circle stood his opponent, a proven warrior chosen by the council, broad and scarred, radiating the kind of calm confidence that only came from decades of combat experience. Near the front of the gathered crowd, Rook, Fawn, and Tally pressed close together, their small bodies tense, sensing the fear radiating from the human they had chosen months ago as their own. Queen Sabbath sat upon her raised stone throne overlooking the circle, her expression unreadable, though her eyes never left Daniel. The horn sounded, and the fight began. The warrior moved fast for something so large, closing the distance in a heartbeat, forcing Daniel to dive sideways to avoid a heavy first strike that cracked the stone where he had been standing. Daniel rolled to his feet, breathing hard, remembering every lesson Threk had drilled into him. He could not match raw strength. He would have to rely on everything else. He circled instead of charging, using the wide space of the terrace to his advantage, forcing the warrior to keep turning, keep adjusting, wasting precious energy chasing an opponent who refused to stand still. Every time the warrior closed in, Daniel slipped just out of reach, using quick footwork and careful timing rather than brute force, exactly as he had during the raid days before. Minutes passed, the fight dragging longer than most in the crowd expected. Sweat poured down Daniel's face, his arms burning from blocking heavier strikes than his body was built to handle, but he refused to fall. Slowly, the warrior's frustration began to show, his attacks growing sloppier, driven more by irritation than strategy. It was in that moment of frustration that Daniel saw his opening. As the warrior lunged forward carelessly, Daniel dropped low, sweeping the man's legs out from beneath him, using the same lever technique he had used to free Tally from the fallen support beam during the tremor. The warrior crashed hard onto the stone, momentarily stunned, giving Daniel just enough time to press the flat edge of his blade against the warrior's throat, ending the match without further violence. Silence held the terrace for a long, breathless moment. Then, before the council could even begin to process the outcome, a sudden commotion broke out near the edge of the circle. Rook, unable to hold back any longer, broke free from the crowd and rushed toward Daniel, followed instantly by Fun and Tally, all 3 hatchlings surrounding him in a protective circle, chirping loudly, wings half spread, as if daring anyone to challenge their chosen human further. The sight silenced even the harshest doubters in the crowd. It was one thing to hear stories of a strange bond between hatchlings and a human outsider. It was another to witness it so plainly, 3 young dragons instinctively rushing to defend the very man the council had gathered to judge. Queen Sabbath rose from her throne, her voice carrying easily across the stunned silence of the terrace. The choosing was never a mistake, she declared. It was a truth many among us were too rigid to see. This human has bled for our hatchlings, trained under our harshest teachers, and stood firm when even proven warriors doubted his place among us. I name him, before this entire council, the true champion of the Dragon Spire." A long pause followed, and then, slowly, General Threx stepped forward from among the gathered soldiers, lowering his head in a formal show of respect Daniel had never expected to receive from him. One by one, other soldiers followed, until the entire terrace echoed with the sound of dragons acknowledging, at last, the champion the hatchlings had chosen from the very beginning. Later that evening, as the twin moons rose once more over the quiet mountain, Daniel sat outside his stone quarters, exhausted but strangely at peace. Rook, Fun, and Tally curled contentedly around him. Queen Savith approached slowly, settling nearby, her ancient eyes reflecting the soft moonlight. "You fought a battle none of us expected you to win," she said. "I had help," Daniel replied, glancing down at the 3 sleeping hatchlings. "More than I realized." The queen allowed herself something rare, a small, genuine smile. "The spire is stronger for having you," she said. "Though I suspect this is only the beginning. There are threats beyond our borders that grow bolder each season, threats that may soon test us all far more than a single ritual duel ever could." Daniel looked out over the dark mountains, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. Yet for the first time since crashing onto this strange, fiery world, he did not feel afraid of what was coming. He had a home now, unexpected as it was, 3 small dragons who trusted him completely, and a place among a people who had finally begun to see him as one of their own. Whatever storms lay ahead, he would face them, not as an outsider stranded far from home, but as the champion the Dragon Spire had chosen, in the truest sense, all along. The end.